So these three Russian scientists, and everybody laughs when I say their names for whatever reason, Goncharov, Morozov, and Makarov. I don't know why that's funny, but okay, if y'all want to laugh, you can laugh. Found that over 4,000 sites fit on the global grid. And the global grid that they found, they started with Ivan Sanderson's basic 12 points, the icosahedron, and then they simply added in another geometry called a dodecahedron. And by mixing the two together, they found all the ley lines. They found a way in which everything that has ever been built that looks like it's built to harness this energy, including Chinese temples, pagodas, Stonehenge, dolmens, menhirs, all the stuff I was showing you, cathedrals, all around the world, Easter Island, the mound builders in America, you name it. They found 4,000 of these kinds of sites, and every single one of them was on this grid. So the whole world knew how to use this technology back then, and it's been lost. This is the most advanced version of the grid that we now have, called Becker-Hagen's, and this is where the black spots are the original 12 nodes of Ivan Sanderson's grid. And then you see how it's evolved with, you now have two icosahedras together, one that is out of phase with the other, and that's what creates these 120 different triangles that form the grid. It's called the Unified Vector Geometry 120 Polyhedron, or UVG 120. That's the long name for it, but the simple name is Becker-Hagen's grid, which is a lot easier to say. Yeah?
Are there any here in the United States?
Oh yeah, if you look at the United States on the Becker-Hagen's grid, what's the first big node that you see? It's right around Los Angeles in Baja California there. So this is why there's so many people in Los Angeles, why it's such a huge population center, because we like to be near these nodes. They feel good, and they create a lot of energy. I'm very energized by living in LA. We're in this area right now. We're on this node right now where this talk is happening. The other big one, of course, is right off Florida. And look at this. The lines, again, are very important, and that line shoots straight up the east coast of the United States. So everybody on the East Coast, the whole East Coast megalopolis is all feeding off of that line. And then when people get old and they get sick, what do? They want to move to Florida. Why do they want to move to Florida? Because they feel healthier. Why do they get healthier? Because they're on the node. And the node feeds your DNA. There's Hawaii, okay? And what we know is that Hawaii is right on one of the nodes, and the cancer rates in Hawaii are dramatically lower than anywhere else in the world. Dramatically lower. We also find out that in Washington, D.C., the cancer rates are much lower. So the people that decided where to put the capital of the United States made darn sure that they used this grid, because what you have is a lot of these politicians, and they leave, like I think Richard Hoagland talks about Sam Donaldson as one example, that he left Washington, D.C. and died very soon afterwards. Because in D.C. they have a grid node that gives you a lot of energy that helps you heal. Now what you can also see here is grid effects in which the landmass is being sculpted by these geometric forces. These lines are not arbitrary. You can see these island chains that fit perfectly in a grand circle. You connect these nodes on the grid together. You see how they all fit together. Now the Germans discovered that there were some houses where the energy was really bad and people were getting sick and dying. 1920s in Germany with the dowsers discovered that more people got cancer in these certain houses, and they revealed from their dowsing, which I believe is credible, that the houses had veins of water running underneath them. The neighboring houses did not have two rivers that crossed together under the house. So it's when these two rivers of water crossed together that you were getting these negative effects that actually diminished your health. And apparently the reason why is that when you have two rivers crossing over each other underground, that they draw energy, that it creates an energetic friction that scrambles the field and actually scrambles your field and creates cancer. So it's not always healthy. Sometimes it can be unhealthy. So can we prove the sites harnessed usable energy? Well, obviously somebody thought so, because every single daggone site that you can find out of 4,000 in the world, all were built on this grid. If the grid doesn't mean anything, then why did they do that? Obviously there's a reason. The grid can be shown to have shaped the continents for where they are now, and clearly there was a usable energy that they were harnessing in order to bother to build the pyramid in the first place. I mean, it's not exactly an easy thing to build these pyramids. These stones are weighing hundreds of tons. Some of them are bigger than 18-wheelers. They're much bigger than 18-wheelers. They're the size of small buildings, a single stone. We can't even lift them now. We don't have any crane in the world that's big enough to lift these stones. Why did they bother to do it? And if they're doing it, why would they do it on this specific spot on a grid? What's the point? The point is that they're using energy. Well, if they're using energy, then how can we prove that? I'm not just going to ask you to take my word for it. I want scientific proof that shows me what they're doing and how we can use that technology today to help the world. Is that not a good idea? I mean, that's a great idea. Because if we can use this technology today, then we might be able to solve some problems that we have on the Earth, including the energy crisis. And we may be able to find new ways to keep people healthy. Because, as you can see, the Krebs houses in Germany would actually make people very unhealthy, and other sites were very much associated with health. That's why they built the dolmens and the menhirs and the barrows. These were meditation spots. So in Russia, they now have done research with pyramids that holds the key to explaining all this stuff in a way that we can make sense out of. What you're seeing here on the bottom is people, and this is a 144-foot tall pyramid built out of fiberglass and PVC pipe. PVC pipe on the inside, as you can see here, and then these are the sheets of fiberglass on an angle going up the inside. An amazing, amazing structure that has many, many interesting things that happen once you've built it, both inside and outside. This is not simply something that you get to look at and say, wow, it's a pyramid, it's cool. This is a working technology that they have studied scientifically. And by the way, this is not woo-woo science. These are the same people that were in the military-industrial complex of the Soviet Union who, after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1990-91 timeframe, still had the facilities, still had the communist government paying them a monthly salary, but didn't have anything to do because the military-industrial complex no longer existed as it once did. So they still have the labs, they still have a salary, and they can study whatever the heck they want. So because they had this whole background of research, they built pyramids. And they studied the science of pyramids, and they came up with some amazing research. So here are some smaller examples. You can see they were built in the countryside. This one obviously is a lot shorter. Now let's take a look at some of the things that they found. If you build one of these pyramids over an oil well, you get 25% more productivity out of the oil well. It's amazing. And you get 25% fewer contaminants in the oil. They found incredible healing results. First of all, if you take a poisonous substance and you store it inside the pyramid, the chemical makeup of the substance changes, and it's no longer toxic to the body. The pyramid is harnessing the very energy of life, the energy that keeps things alive and keeps things healthy. They even found that cancer, you could give the same carcinogens to lab rats and then to rats in the pyramid, and the rats in the pyramid would get much, much fewer tumors, if any, than the rats in the lab. You give them exactly the same carcinogen, and the rats in the pyramid do fine. The same thing was true with typhoid fever, diabetes, all this kinds of stuff. In the pyramid, there was no problem. There was a 400% increase in the productivity of seeds that were stored in the pyramid. That's another amazing effect. All you got to do is take seeds and scatter them into the pyramid, and then leave them there for a while, and then start planting them. And the plants are 400% bigger than the same seeds that were not put in the pyramid, over and over again. So it's like the seed itself and the plant that grows from it has been supercharged by this energy in a very fascinating way. There was strong electrical activity generated at the top of the pyramid, meaning that you could actually put a battery pile, like a battery charger up there, which is just positive, negative in a big solution, and it starts generating electrical current, and you can power your house with it. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because what they also found was that earthquakes did not happen anymore as these big, nasty, catastrophic events. They only got small little quakes that didn't cause any trouble to the land. Now, if the ancients are building pyramids all over the world, and we know that Atlantis sank, then do you think that maybe they were trying to make sure that that didn't happen again? Or, an even more interesting idea is, what if the ancients knew that Atlantis was going to sink, and they were in a mad dash to try to stop it from happening by building pyramids around the world, and they didn't get the network finished in time? That's another possibility. We don't really know which one it is. There was also an enormous column of energy detectable around the pyramid in the atmosphere, hundreds of miles wide. And this column of energy would actually deflect severe weather. You would have a storm coming in, and there's this big circle that forms around the pyramid, this energetic circle. And the storm just goes right around the circle. It's incredible. So, what does this start telling us about the nature of weather? Think about that for a minute. What is weather? What is a severe weather activity? It's a torsion field, right? It's a consciousness thing. Earthquakes. Earthquakes, to some degree, are related to this torsion field, because if you have this pyramid which is regularizing that flow of energy, then you no longer get earthquakes anymore. The ancient teachings tell us that the earth is alive, and that bad weather and bad problems are the result of the earth being upset with us. That we create a disharmony, and the disharmony that we create is what creates the bad weather and the bad earthquakes and the volcanoes and all that stuff. And the pyramids were able to make all this stuff happen. The Russians took granite that looked like salt and pepper. It was white and black granite, and they put the granite inside the pyramid. And then after a while, they took the granite out and they built jail cells with it. And what they found was that the prisoners who stayed in the jail cells made out of this specific granite were much more well-behaved than the other prisoners. The prisons that were built, where the cells were built with this granite, those prisoners in those prisons they all got off of alcohol and drugs. They all started to get along with each other much more than the others. And the problem is that the translation was bad, and we thought that it was actually salt and pepper that they were feeding the prisoners. But it turns out that salt and pepper is actually granite. So that's a mistake. So this proves that there is a connection between the consciousness of humanity and the consciousness of the earth. Earth changes are not something that's happening randomly. We're also, oh my God, global warming, what are we going to do? Oh, we got to use solar power and stop driving cars and stuff. Well, obviously we should figure out how to get cars running on water, and I was talking to you about that technology. That already exists. We could desalinate the oceans very easily with some of these technologies. But global warming is an energetic phenomenon. And it's a phenomenon that, as I said, is occurring throughout the solar system. It proves there's a connection between earthquakes and consciousness. It proves that there's a connection between severe weather and consciousness. And it proves that our consciousness is directly affecting the earth. So that's a very significant piece of information for us to have, because it gives us the power back. We're no longer out there expecting that these things cannot be dealt with, that there's really nothing we can do. We do have the control. We do have the power. And it comes from pursuing the truth within ourselves. And then that truth has a radiant quality that affects the whole planet. So all we have to do is work on ourselves, work on our own inner spiritual quest, find the love within ourselves, find the ability to love ourselves, which is primarily through forgiveness. If you have forgiveness, then you can deal with all of these terrible things in your life that you haven't been willing to accept. With forgiveness comes the stoppage of the wheel of karma. You don't have to keep going through cycle after cycle of suffering anymore, because now what you're doing is breaking the cycle. And so on a collective level, all these earth changes over here are happening because we haven't gotten to this forgiveness over here. And when we master this, then these synthesize together, and we won't have earth changes anymore. That's part of what 2012 is about. The Law of One series, My Spiritual Backbone, says very clearly, there are no more earth changes after 2012. All of the scary stuff that's happening stops. So regardless of what you believe is going to happen, if you buy into the Law of One, and if you follow my work, you know how strongly I do, because there's a lot of science that backs up what was in those books. The books were channeled in 1981, And there's a lot of stuff that came out since then that validates point for point what's in those books, and it's way too long to explain right now. But there's a lot of stuff on my website, divinecosmos.com, about that. It said very clearly 2012 is an energetic transformation. It's a transformation that affects everyone on Earth. It's a transformation that effectively turns us into light beings, and that the Earth changes as we know them stop after 2012. Very fascinating. The pyramid was the master design in which the open sarcophagus in the king's chamber, you're supposed to lie in it. You have an out-of-body experience where you then face your own shadow self, projected to you as this monster that you have to wrestle with in the astral plane. And if you successfully can forgive and accept that part of yourself that appears to be evil, then you get the healing. Now, this is what's happening to us as a planet. What do you think that projection of the part of ourselves that looks evil is in the planet right now? The New World Order, the Illuminati, the government. If you are angry at the New World Order, if you are angry at the Illuminati, if you hate them, and if you're out there afraid of them, they're winning. Because negative entities feed on your fear. They actually harness your energy of fear. The fear that you feel sends energy to them. What I'm here to tell you is that there is nothing to be afraid of, because they are fulfilling their purpose of acting as the projection of our shadow. We're going through this planetary initiation of the open sarcophagus. The reason why it's open is that once we're through this, there is no more death. We have reached a state of immortality, much different than where we are now. That's what the prophecies say. When someone who is profane, if you will, using a Masonic term, goes into the pyramid, like Napoleon, he had a terrible night. He tried to stay in the sarcophagus overnight. He had horrible nightmares, and he ran screaming out of the pyramid. So you have to be ready for this. That's his actual sketch of his terrible night in the pyramid that he drew. Isaac Newton, of course, was just another guy, a scientist, and he happened to see an apple fall, and everybody saw apples falling out of trees all the time. The only difference is that Newton starts saying, hey, why did the apple fall out of the tree? Is there something that made the apple fall out of the tree? It's gravity. There's a force that pulled the apple out of the tree and made it hit the ground. It doesn't just happen. There's a reason for why it happens. So this is the new Newtonian revolution. And the question is, are we looking to see the apple falling? Are we looking at the obvious truth of pyramids, Stonehenge, standing stones, temples, churches, megalithic structures built all around the world, 4,000 of them, and every single one is built on this grid? That's the same thing as Newton seeing the apple fall. That's the same thing. The only difference is that we haven't yet identified that there's a force responsible for why they built these things in these places. This brings us back to the questions of God. What you're starting to see is a provable spiritual teaching, a scientifically valid exploration of a supreme being. That's where we're going. Religion doesn't need to be there except as a way to organize your understanding of a one infinite creator. You can go into this atheistic and look at it strictly scientifically and come to the conclusion that there must be some intelligence to the universe. And that's one of the problems, is that the word intelligent design has now been irrevocably intertwined with creationist biblical teaching. And that should not happen, because many people who are proponents of intelligent design are not buying into mainstream Christian theology. But what's happened is that either you're a scientist, which means you don't believe any of this stuff, or you're a religious nutcase. But there's a middle ground, and that's the thing, is the ancients knew this. And then you have groups like the Masonic Order, which have taken all these ancient traditions, like on the back of the dollar bill, and they make it secret, but they hide it right out in front of you. They've shown you the pyramid, right? They're showing you the eye going down. Obviously, they think that's really important. because it's one. They have the word one on the dollar everywhere, one God, right? It's the one God. George Washington's eye is directly in the middle of the dollar on the front. If you go and take a look, you'll see that. Because there's a little painting in the top of the U.S. Capitol dome. If you sit on your back and you look up at the top of the Capitol, there's a painting up there, a fresco, called The Apotheosis of George Washington, in which he is positioned on a rainbow because they believe that he ascended after he was president of the United States and that he became a god, because they believe themselves to be gods where no one else is. And so what happens is they do not want us to know this, because if we knew that the pyramid could bring us to a godlike state, then we would start building them and we'd start using them, and they don't want us to have the technology. So they flaunt it right in front of you. They put it on the dollar bill. And they build the largest building in Washington, D.C. is what? The Washington Monument, which is what? It's a big obelisk. It's the same thing as the menhir, the standing stone, intended to ripple out energy into the surrounding city. You have a question? She asked, is it true that the world elite have different DNA? This is very interesting, and somebody asked me about our new whistleblower, Dr. Pete Peterson, and wanting me to share some of his testimony. And I said this on the radio with Project Camelot. I'll repeat it. There are some technologies that have been discovered that allow you to have a certain degree of influence over people's minds. Mind control. Okay? It's scary stuff. It is primarily something that can create blunt changes. It's not anything that can beam into your head and make you do very specific things. That's a misnomer. But it is possible to make a rough change to the way that people feel using certain types of energy based on these technologies. However, Dr. Peterson's research people found that fully 15% of all the people in the world cannot be affected by mind control. Ever. Ever. Now, we got this from the highest level of the Black Ops community. They cannot be affected at all. Ever. They developed a technology to make sure that if you're not part of that 15%, that you become part of that 15% who can never be affected by mind control. The technology is very simple, and they gave it to all the world leaders and all the Illuminati politicians. And they would hide it under their shirt lapel. See, I don't have one, because I'm not in there, all right? I'm just proving it right now. The technology is this little device that you put in your eye, and it has a little blinking light in it. And you turn a knob on the thing, and it makes the light blink faster and faster and faster, and you look at it. And what you're supposed to do is you keep looking at this device until the blinking frequency is so fast that you don't see the blink anymore, that you only see a clean light. Now what you want to do is get to the point that you can see it blinking faster and faster. That's the goal. You want to be able to see the blink and not have it turn into a solid light. Now, it's called a flicker frequency generator, because what happens is it finds out the exact level. You turn it up just to the level where it becomes a solid color, where you no longer see blinking. And then there's a little weird circuit in there that's based on torsion fields. It's this funny little circuit, and it generates that frequency, and it's beaming it into your body. It's a very, very simple circuit. There's nothing high technology about this, but what it does is it keeps your brain rate, it keeps your frequency of your brainwave activity up at the level where this frequency is flickering at a higher speed. Okay? Once your brainwave activity is up at that higher speed, you cannot be mind controlled at all. Now, any of us can reach that frequency. And the best way to reach it is, guess what? You knew what the answer was. Meditation. If you are in a positive, uplifting state of consciousness, if you are inspired and you're not negative and down but you have this positive outlook, your flicker frequency is too high to be affected by mind control. Now then the next question is, well, 15% of the people automatically don't have any susceptibility to mind control. And it turns out that, yes, they do have a slightly different form of DNA than the rest of the planet. That's true. But it's not just people in the New World Order. And it's not just a master race. It's not just the white man. It's black people. It's Asian people. It's every race has part of this 15%. The thing that these guys in the government haven't discovered yet is that that little DNA marker that they found in the DNA is something that you switch on. You're not born with it. You switch it on by getting enlightened. Okay? That's why 15% of the people have it. It's the DNA marker that shows you that you have reached a level where your DNA has activated and where you no longer are susceptible to mind control. So if you are worried about this kind of stuff, if you are in fear, the answer to fear is love. Because fear is the absence of the energy of the universe. The energy of the universe will destroy poison, it will destroy disease, it will bring you bliss, it will bring you happiness, and it will bring you vitality to your physical body. It will raise your IQ, it will raise your vibration. It does these amazing, miraculous things. And the reason why you can see it in the DNA is that you switch on your DNA.